Aid to the Church in Need is also leading a campaign to protect persecuted Christians called Courage in Red. In the Brooklyn Diocese and around the world, places of worship were being illuminated in red, the color of martyrs, part of a campaign this week spearheaded by the papal charity Aid to the Church in Need. The effort is being called Courage in Red Week, and it's designed to bring attention to the plight of persecuted Christians in the hope that greater awareness will lead to greater action to defend religious liberty around the world. Now, at St. Joseph's Co-Cathedral, Monsignor Kieran Harrington led the congregation in the celebration of Solemn Vespers for Christ the King. And Monsignor Harrington joins us now to discuss his recent experience with persecuted Christians when he traveled to the Middle East. Monsignor, thank you so much for being here with me.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
I really appreciate it. Let's start by giving this some context. Aid to the Church in Need is reporting that Christians continue to be the most persecuted religious group on earth. And we're talking almost 300 million that live in a country where they face great atrocities. We're talking violence, arrest, human rights violations, religious freedom is not respected. You spent several months in the Middle East. First, where did you go?
So I was in a number of places. The base was really Lebanon, which was a Christian country, but is a country which is very diverse and really an experiment because you have Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims and Christians all participating in government with tensions, but at the same time, a spirit of collaboration. Then from there I was in Iraq and was over to Jordan and to Egypt and to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. So I really was able to get a good sense of the Christian faith all throughout the region in the Middle East.
And having said that, how did you find the conditions there?
Well, they varied from place to place. What I think was most significant is the fear that a lot of Christians experience throughout the Middle East, the sense of being put upon. There are different levels of persecution. So there's persecution, then there's discrimination. If you were to be in Egypt, for instance, the Egyptian Christians, and even though that last year there were places where there were Christians killed on Palm Sunday, they would say that they experience more discrimination than they do persecution.
Okay.
They make about 10% of the population of Egypt. If you were to speak about Christians who are in Syria, they certainly experienced persecution. Many of the Christians who fled Syria, fled Iraq, who are in the camps, the refugee camps, they won't go to the refugee camps. And the reason why they don't come to the United States or Europe is because they don't settle in the refugee camps, which means the UN High Commission on Refugees can't process them. And the reason why they won't go there is because they don't want to be exposed as Christians, their families exposed to harm. If you go to visit Christians in places like Iraq, you can see that their homes are burned to the ground as of last year.
Yeah.
So, these are places that are still enduring great suffering, but it varies from place to place.
Given persecution and given discrimination, and I appreciate that you made that distinction, with all of that happening to these people, were they free ever to openly practice the faith?
Well, for instance, Iraq is a great example of this. If you take a look at the churches in Iraq, there's not particularly beautiful artwork. And you'd go there and say, well, why is there no art? Why is there not iconography and that sort? And the reason for it is because the church was never at peace for a long enough period of time for art to develop. So these are Christians who have been put upon for years. Many of them would get tattoos because they want to make sure that even if they are captured, they will not deny the Christian faith. So there is a great zeal and sense of commitment to Christ throughout the Middle East. My experience has been, whether Palestinian Christians, Lebanese, certainly Egyptians, they are ardent in their faith and they're really willing to die for their faith.
How about Jewish believers, Monsignor? Are they persecuted there as well?
Well, I mean, there are no Jews really in Iraq anymore. In fact, I visited one of the last temples there. So they have experience, but the Jewish community is so small. Christians are a larger number, and so that's why the level of persecution would be.
So
when Aid to Church in Need would say Christians are most persecuted, you're thinking about the large Christian population in India, which would experience real discrimination. There are prohibitions upon proselytizing. There are large Christian communities, again, in Syria and in Iraq. in places like Egypt, in China. And so this is the reason why when aid to church, 1,200 Christians last year were martyred for the faith. Hundreds of thousands experienced real discrimination and that sort of thing.
In about 30 seconds, if that's even possible, Monsignor, what can the church, what can the U.S. government do to make things better, to strengthen religious tolerance?
Well, let's talk about Christians. We're Christians, so what the church can do is the most important thing, in my experience, has been that throughout the Middle East, Christians want to know that they are not alone. And they do feel sometimes that they are alone, that Christians in the West have really forgotten about them, are not really concerned about them. And so the most important thing we can do is to pray for them. The other thing we can do is we can assist organizations like Aid to Church in Need, Catholic Near East Welfare Association, others, to help the Christians who are in these places. Now, the importance of the help is not so much the financial support, it's that they're not alone.
Thank you, Monsignor, so much. I could obviously talk about this so much more with you, but I appreciate the insight that you brought to us today.
Thanks, Liz.